Alright guys, here are the 9 things I wish I knew before I started selling sports cards. Alright guys, number 1 is cash is king. Basically, if you're going to card shows, never pay 100% comps for cards if you're paying with cash. When paying with cash, you can get deals up to 70 to 80% comps depending on the quantity you're buying. Alright, tip number 2 is to buy in bulk. When I first started off buying sports cards, I would buy one card at a time, the ones that I liked, and finally I'd have a collection. But actually, if you look at the macro instead of the micro and just buy a bunch of cards at once, you're going to save yourselves a bunch of money on cards. And this can literally be the difference between moving your cards for a 10 to 15% profit and a 25 to 30% profit. All right, tip number 3 is liquidity isn't everything. I've had cases where I go to card shows and I bring my entire case and nobody wants what I have. Does that mean what I have is worthless? Absolutely not. I've had cases where I take that same case, I go home, post those cards on eBay, Instagram, MySlabs, whatever, and they sell in a night. So what moves at a card show isn't always indicative of what is moving in the hobby. It just could be that at the show, people weren't interested. If you're serious about cards in the hobby, I seriously recommend you guys at least go to the Dallas Card Show at least once. The security, the venue, the quality of cards that you see is bar none matched at a lot of the local shows you go to in your state. I personally live in California, and every time there's a Dallas Card Show, I will usually go. It's like every 2 or 3 months, but every single time it's worth it. You have the show that goes from like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then everyone kind of goes to get barbecue for dinner, and then after it's back to trade night, where it's going from like 8 o'clock all the way to 4 a.m. It's up to you how long you want to stay, but yeah, personally, don't waste your money going to like other shows. If you're gonna fly out of state, just narrow in on Dallas Card Show and then kind of figure out where you want to go. Tip number 5 is to learn to work your way up. There are so many new little nuances in the hobby, including comping, grading companies, and all these different parallels that Panini is putting out these days, that there's just so much information to learn all at once. Basically, the moral of the story is to just go little by little and start with the basic stuff. If you see any of the dealers that have the Michael Jordan autos and the red refractor PSA 10 autos, all these guys started off selling base PSA 10s, base cards, raw cards, and then they learned to work their way up and they comped more difficult cards that don't necessarily have direct comps all the time, and then they kind of grew their collection. So I really recommend you guys do the same thing for your own collection. Tip number 6 is to learn to trade. Basically, a lot of people start out and they just usually want to sell their cards for cash, but that's not always possible at every show, and the opportunity may arise at a show to trade, and this can actually be a really big opportunity for people to move up without necessarily dropping cash on cards. I've seen people move up thousands, $2,000 at a single show just by trading and not even dropping a single dollar. So it's definitely worth learning how to trade to improve your collection. All right, tip number 7 isn't as much of a tip as it is just kind of something that I noticed. As I said earlier, I'm from California, and to me, California prices are definitely a real thing. If I go to Dallas or Florida or somewhere like that, I definitely notice the sticker prices are lower than California. Maybe it's the living cost, not sure, but the sticker prices tend to be a little bit higher when you go to California than versus other states. Now, the flip side of this is that there's a bunch of good shows if you're someone who lives in California. You basically have Wylie, who does the San Diego shows, you have EJ doing the Burbank show, and you have Kobe doing the Premier shows. I definitely recommend you guys hit those up. So for people who live in California, yeah, the prices are a little bit higher than say somewhere in like Indiana, but it is a give and take because you are so fortunate to have amazing card shows basically every weekend at your disposal. All right, guys, tip number 8 is super important, but it is to never pay PayPal friends and family or Cash App to someone you've never done a deal with before. I'm pretty sure PayPal is removing this feature, but yeah, if you see a Cash App or PayPal friends and family request, this is an immediate red flag or scam alert. I'm not saying all people who do this are scammers, but it's definitely a trend I see. And for me, myself, I always do PayPal goods and services because there's going to be insurance on that transaction, and things do happen, whether it's someone's fault or not. And that's why it's nice to have the insurance on it, so that way you can get your money back if the card comes smashed when the delivery comes. All right, guys, the last tip is a bit basic, but it is to check comps. And I'm not telling you guys just to check comps just to say it, but what I'm trying to say is your success or failure flipping a card will boil down to your ability to check comps and use those to estimate a fair value for your card. A lot of times you'll have a card that doesn't have a direct comp for that grade, and you kind of have to do some research looking at raw cards in different grades to estimate a value for the card that you have.